Beneath the surface. Rachel had spent most of her life constructing a fortress. A carefully curated wall built of ambition and necessity, layered with titles, deadlines, and responsibilities. It was a life of control, a life in which every move was calculated, every decision made with the precision of an executive, and every moment stripped of emotion. She wore the mask of success effortlessly, convincing herself that the loneliness she felt beneath it all was a small price to pay for the comforts of professional achievement. As a high-level executive at one of the most competitive marketing firms in the city, Rachel was known for her discipline, her work ethic, and her ability to push through barriers. Her colleagues admired her, they envied her. They saw the woman who was always composed, always sharp, always one step ahead. But they didn't see the aching void she had learned to ignore. Rachel was proud of what she had accomplished, but somewhere deep inside, she couldn't shake the feeling that something, or rather, someone, was missing. She'd never let herself acknowledge it, too busy, too focused, too driven, but it was there, like a quiet murmur coursing beneath her skin. Maybe it was her career, the walls of achievement that had kept the world at bay. Or maybe it was the person she had become. There was a persistent feeling of having lost touch with something vital, something human, but she couldn't pinpoint exactly when or how. Then Aaron walked into her life. Aaron was everything Rachel wasn't: spontaneous, carefree, open. He was the new creative director for an upcoming project, an infusion of warmth into the rigid, structured environment that Rachel had carefully nurtured. Where Rachel saw the world in black and white, Aaron saw it in hues of vibrant color. He laughed easily, connected deeply, and wore his heart on his sleeve. He was the antithesis of everything she had been, and it unsettled her more than she was willing to admit. At first, Rachel was annoyed by him. His casual approach to work irked her. He was always the first to arrive, the last to leave, but his time at the office seemed less focused than hers. He shrugged off deadlines with a devil-may-care grin and preferred collaboration over the solitary decision-making that Rachel excelled in. While Rachel saw his way of working as chaotic, Aaron seemed to thrive in it, and it irritated her to no end. His presence felt like a disruption, a crack in the unyielding wall she had built. But what unsettled her more was how easily his laughter and openness could disarm her, catching her off guard in moments she'd prefer to remain tight-lipped and composed. One afternoon, as Rachel's thoughts raced over a particularly demanding client proposal, Aaron approached her desk with a grin. "Any chance you'd like to join us for lunch today?" he asked, holding up a box of takeout. "I know it's not quite your usual style, but a little break might do wonders. You look like you've been at this for hours." Rachel stiffened, irritation rising. She had plenty to do, and the last thing she needed was a distraction. "I'm fine. I have things to focus on." Aaron didn't push further, but his eyes lingered on her. There was no judgment there, only curiosity. Rachel quickly turned back to her screen, hiding behind the glow of her computer as if it could shield her from his gaze. She couldn't afford to let her walls crack. But as days passed and their project continued, something strange began to happen. Aaron's easy nature and unexpected kindness started to seep into the edges of her consciousness. His presence brought a calming warmth, easing the tension she didn't realize had been building up for years. The moments when Aaron spoke to her, whether about the project or something as trivial as his favorite movie, felt different. His words were more than just pleasantries, they were a thread of connection that she had long since abandoned. She found herself listening intently when he spoke, allowing herself to hear the warmth in his voice that she had long since discarded in favor of cold efficiency. A small part of her wanted to push him away, but another part, one she hadn't acknowledged in years, began to reach for him. One evening, after a grueling day at the office, Aaron invited her for a walk. The city was alive with the hum of traffic and the murmur of distant conversations, but Rachel felt a strange peace in the crisp evening air. They walked in silence for a while, each of them lost in their own thoughts, until the quiet became too heavy. Do you ever feel like you've sacrificed too much? Rachel spoke in a hushed tone. It was a question she hadn't intended to ask, but it slipped out, as if her heart had finally decided to speak for her. Aaron glanced at her, his expression soft, attentive. What do you mean? Rachel stopped walking, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. She felt vulnerable, exposed, and it was terrifying. But she couldn't stop now. I've spent so many years focusing on my career, she said, her voice thickening with emotion. I pushed everything else away. Relationships, family, myself. I've been so busy chasing success that I didn't even realize how much I've been running from the things that really matter. Aaron didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stood beside her, waiting for her to continue. I've never let myself be vulnerable, Rachel said, her eyes downcast. I've always believed that if I kept pushing, kept working, kept achieving, that I'd be fine. But now, I feel so empty. Like there's this hole that no amount of success can fill. The confession left her shaken. The words she had buried for so long had tumbled out, and now they hung in the air between them, weighty and unfiltered. Aaron was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on her. Then, gently, he spoke. I get it, he said, his voice low and sincere. I've been there. I've spent so much time trying to fit in, trying to make myself useful, trying to be seen. But the truth is, sometimes it's not about what we do. It's about who we are. He looked at her, his eyes soft with understanding. You don't have to be perfect to deserve love. You're enough just as you are. Rachel's breath caught in her throat, and before she could stop it, a tear slipped down her cheek. It wasn't the sadness of the past she was mourning, it was the weight of years spent convincing herself that she was enough only when she was constantly striving. Now, standing there with Aaron, she felt something deep within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time, the freedom to just be. I don't know how to let go, she sighed, more to herself than to him. Aaron reached out, his hand brushing lightly over her shoulder. His touch was warm, reassuring. You don't have to do it alone. I'm here, he said, his voice steady and gentle. For the first time in years, Rachel let herself believe those words. The walls she had built so carefully, the fortress she had spent a lifetime constructing, began to crumble, piece by piece. She felt defenseless and laid bare, and yet, for the first time, she felt alive. They stood there, the city swirling around them, but in that moment, everything else faded into the background. There was only Aaron, his presence a quiet assurance that she didn't have to face the world alone. She didn't have to hide anymore. I'd been so afraid, Rachel confessed, her voice trembling with emotion. Afraid of letting people in, of being seemingly weak. But with you, Aaron, I feel like I don't have to be perfect. Like I can just be me. Aaron's smile was slow, genuine. You don't have to be perfect. I see you. And you're enough. Tears began to fall freely now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of release, of relief. Rachel had spent so long running from herself, from the possibility of real connection, that she had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. And now, standing there in the quiet night with Aaron, she felt it. She wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, she responded, her voice unguarded. She didn't know if she was thanking him for the simple act of kindness, or for the way he had opened her eyes to the possibility of something more. Aaron didn't answer. Instead, he simply stepped closer, his hand resting on her arm. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. In that touch, Rachel felt the weight of years of solitude lift from her shoulders. As they stood together, the sounds of the city around them seemed to fade. Rachel had come to a crossroads, not one of uncertainty, but one of choice. She could return to her old life, to the safety of solitude, to the armor she had so carefully constructed. Or she could take a step forward, into the unknown, and embrace the possibility of connection, of love, and of a future where she no longer had to hide behind her walls. With a deep breath, Rachel looked up at Aaron, a tear still glistening on her cheek. And for the first time in a long time, she smiled, genuinely, without hesitation. "I think I'm ready," she said quietly, her voice filled with quiet hope. Aaron smiled back, his eyes warm and steady. "I'm right here," he said softly. "And I'll be with you every step of the way." The world around them seemed to disappear as Rachel realized that, at long last, she was free. Free to be herself, to embrace the possibility of love, and to live fully, without the need to hide behind her work. And in the stillness of the night, as the city hummed softly around them, Rachel felt a quiet peace settle deep within her soul.